The Hindu Rashtra is a very, very bad idea. A country for the Hindus? Terrible idea. In fact, it is the worst idea in the history of the world. This is what an Indian leftist or a person belonging to an Abrahamic religion usually would say when the topic of a Hindu Rashtra is brought up. Now, to a Hindu, it just doesn't make sense. There are so many Christian countries in the world. There are Muslim countries in the world. There is a Buddhist country in the world. Why is there such a problem with a Hindu country? An average Hindu simply cannot understand that because your regular Hindu, he or she, is a peace-loving person who believes in Vasudev Kutumbakam, the world is a family. And just because they want a country of their own triggers such a response in other people is simply beyond them. Well, there is a reason for that. There is a reason it triggers such a response, especially among the people of the Deen, because you are a product of your circumstances, the society in which you live, the situation at your home, what your parents teach you, what you are taught in school, what you hear from people around you. And when a Muslim thinks of India as a Hindu Rashtra, the first thought that comes into his mind is that in this particular country, made by the Hindu for the Hindu, I will be treated as a third-class citizen, because in an Islamic state, an infidel, a non-believer would be treated pretty poorly. So they think that in case there is a Hindu Rashtra, they will also be treated in a similar manner. And that is why they are so against this concept, this idea of Hindu Rashtra. Now, this is not just my opinion. This is not just something I think or something that I'm speculating about. This is backed up by the Islamic scriptures, especially a particular document. This document that is known as the Pact of Umar. Umar was the second Khalifa of Islam, a very, very important and a very violent figure in the history of Islam. And it was in his rule that this treaty, this Pact of Umar, was formulated. It is a very important document in the history of Islam because it established a framework which dictated and which continues to dictate the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims, especially Muslims and non-Muslims living under an Islamic rule. And it is to continue for the rest of the time, just like everything else that is in their scriptures. One huge concept that arose out of this treaty was the concept of a dhimmi or a zimmi. A zimmi refers to a non-Muslim, a non-believer, who lives in an Islamic state, and he has been granted a quote-unquote asylum in exchange for paying a tax, the tax that is called jizya. In return, he accepts certain restrictions in his day-to-day life. Now, it must be remembered that as per their book, an unbeliever, if he does not accept the deen, he or she has to be executed. However, it is considered an act of gracious magnanimity and mercy that the Islamic State is letting you live in return for a little bit of tax. There's been a recent trend on Instagram, on TikTok and YouTube of well-spoken, well-educated Muslims from the West making a lot of these short videos, in which they supposedly talk about the misunderstood concepts of Islam. And one of the things that they speak about is the concept of a zimmi, in which they say that, look, it's not such a bad thing. No matter where you live in the world, you have to pay tax. So in an Islamic state, you would pay a little bit of a tax and you'd be able to live freely. You'll be able to live your life just like you would at any other place. In return for paying the tax, you would be protected. Anybody who's studied their books will easily suspect that the reality is probably going to be very, very different. Because a zimmi is not just a second-class citizen. If that was the case, it would be a good thing. Neither is a zimmi a third-class or a fourth-class citizen. A zimmi, in fact, is a non-person. He is a subhuman. And again, it's not just my opinion. You can go to the scriptures. There is plenty of proof, and much more than that. You can read the history of the world and how non-believers were treated in various Islamic states that have established themselves over the centuries. Or you could just take a look at any Islamic state right now. When Islamic State had power over Syria, what was happening there? What is happening in Afghanistan right now? We all know that the Sikhs and the Hindus, whatever little number that remained in Afghanistan, they had to run. But then the apologists might say that, hey, that's just probably an exception. That is just a one-time occurrence. So let's just go to the scriptures. Let's just see what these scriptures say. We are going to go back to that document, which is the Pact of Umar. What does it say? What does it say about the status of the Zimmis? First of all, it talks about the religious position of a Zimmi. A Zimmi is not allowed to build his or her place of worship in an Islamic state. He can have access to a structure that has existed from a pre-Islamic time, but he is not allowed to repair it. Neither is he allowed to extend it, nor can he restrict access to it. For example, if a traveling Muslim comes to their town and he wants shelter for the night in the Zimmi's place of worship, the non-believer, the Zimmi, cannot say no. So you cannot say that, hey, non-Hindus are not allowed in a temple or non-Christians are not allowed in the church. Nope. You have to provide the Muslim access to it. Now, the way you practice your religion in an Islamic state is also put under scrutiny. You cannot display any of your religious symbols. So if you are a Christian, you absolutely cannot display a cross in front of the church that you pray at. Neither can you pray loudly, neither shall you chant, neither shall you sing. No sight or sound of your religious practices should carry itself to a Muslim. Neither shall you take out any processions, especially not in the presence of Muslims, especially not your idols. They should never ever come to the side of a Muslim. Neither can you hold a funeral for your dead. You can't grieve them, and even if you must grieve them, it should be privately in your homes, and none of that sound should go out to the streets. The third big point it talks about is that a Zimmi must never ever entice or invite a Muslim to accept his religion. So a ghar wapsi is absolute no-no. But if a family member of yours or a relative or a friend of yours wants to accept Islam, then you cannot stop him. It's a crime if you stop him. And if you're a married person and your spouse accepts Islam, let's say your wife accepts Islam, then you also have to convert to Islam or you have to divorce her. So these are the religious restrictions that have been put on a Zimmi. Apart from that, there are also many other things that affect a non-believer's day-to-day life. For example, a non-believer cannot dress up like a Muslim. You cannot wear shoes like them. You cannot have a hairstyle or a beard like a Muslim does. But to identify yourself that you are a non-believer, you have to wear a belt around your waist. You cannot ride a horse or a donkey, and neither can you own any arms. You cannot walk around with a sword. Not possible. Your hairstyle, your look from far away should convey the fact that you are not a Muslim. But what happens when you come across a Muslim? In that case, you have to give the utmost respect. For example, if you are in a public gathering or in a public place and a Muslim enters the room, you must immediately get up. A Zimmi has to respect the Muslim. If you're walking on the street and from the other side you see a Muslim man coming towards you, you must immediately cross the road, go to the farthest corner of the street, and not come in the way of the Muslim man. Similarly, your house cannot be higher than a Muslim man's house. And anytime a Muslim seeks shelter in the house of a Zimmi, the Zimmi has to provide food and stay for him for at least 3 days. The last big point it talks about is the role of Zimmi when it comes to a war. So when a Muslim army goes to war and when it wins, everybody who fought the war is entitled to receive ganimat, which is the spoil, which is basically the spoils of war. It's referred to as male ganimat. And male ganimat comprises of the gold, the treasures, the animals, the women, and the children who are taken as slaves. 1/5 of the ganimat goes to the Khalifa, and the rest is divided amongst the army as per your rank and as per your role. But when it comes to a Zimmi, he gets no share of the ganima. He only gets the most basic allowance. And neither can a Zimmi be appointed to any position of power, not a judge, not a governor, not a commander, not a leader of any position whatsoever. So these are the rules that govern a zimmi, a non-believer in an Islamic state. Now you tell me, is this a second-class citizen or is it much worse? You tell me. Now, out of this document came a second very, very important concept. And this concept was jizya. I often tell you how Muslims interpret things, how they try to make Islamic concepts seem very harmless. And they often act as apologists for the ills that ail their society. But then there might be some of you who might think that I'm just making up things. So I've gone ahead and done some Google searches and I've taken some screenshots to give you some proof of how a regular, everyday, educated Muslim thinks of these concepts. So here is the first person who's talking about what is a jizya. And he portrays it as a very optional thing that everybody does not need to pay jizya. If he goes to war, then he doesn't need to pay jizya, and that the place of worship will be protected by the government. Well, anybody can see what's happening to non-Muslim places of worship in Pakistan. So I reckon his last point is immediately invalidated. Another person from Egypt, he talks about jizya. And this person says the same thing that I told you guys about earlier, that jizya is nothing but a protection fee, that it is not a means of financial torture, and a zimmi doesn't have to pay it just because he is a non-Muslim. So here is a third person talking about jizya, and he clearly says that you had to pay jizya when you did not want to fight a Muslim war. As you can see, the three people there talked about a lot of different things. Everybody seems to have their own particular concept of jizya. But what is the official definition? What does the book say? What do the scriptures say? In front of you is a screenshot from Quran.com. This is directly from the Quran. As anybody would know, to deny the writings in the Quran is kufr. It is one of the biggest sins a Muslim can commit. So what does the Quran say? It says, paying jizya is a sign of kufr and disgrace. Muslims are not allowed to honor the people of Zimma or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced, and humiliated. It says very clearly. Another practical instance of this can be found in the Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi, where it says, when the collector of the divan asks them, the Hindus that is, to pay the tax, they should pay it with all humility and submission. And if the collector wishes to spit into their mouths, they should open their mouths without the slightest fear of contamination, so that the collector may do so. In this state, they should stand before the collector. The object of such humiliations in spitting into their mouths is to prove the obedience of infidel subjects under protection and to promote the glory of Islam, the true religion, and to show contempt to false religions, God Himself. See, in this line, he is referring to the passage from the Quran. God Himself orders us to despise them. I've given you 3 instances of Muslim apologists trying to soften the definition of jizya, and I have given you 2 scriptural references of what it really is. In our historical records, there are mentions of jizya. The Mughals are very famous for levying a lot of taxes on the common people. I made a post on my Instagram recently about it, because people say that Mughals did such great things for the Indian economy, which is not really true. But yeah, they did levy a lot of tax. So one of these times, Hindus had gathered outside Delhi, thousands and thousands of Hindus, and they were protesting against the jizya levied by Aurangzeb. While the protest was going on, how did Aurangzeb respond? He set elephants free on them and left them to be trampled. Rana Singh of Udaipur, Jaswant Singh, and even Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, they wrote letters advising the Mughal king to remove the jizya, but had no success there. So far, we have learned that Muslims think that a Hindu Rashtra will be such a bad idea because in an Islamic state, an unbeliever has no rights and a pretty pathetic way of living. So they think that in case there is a Hindu Rashtra, they will also have to live similar lives. Such a belief is supported by the scriptures, by historical precedents, and even by current happenings around the Muslim world. So I have addressed their doubts in the first part of this conversation. In the next part of this conversation, let me go completely the opposite way